What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazday. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to this episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazday, and boy, do we have an amazing guest. Oh my gosh, Lynne Twist is in the house. Lynne, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Listeners, you guys don't know this, but Lynne has been on my list for a while. She's a former GOT speaker and participant, and I have never met Lynne before, but I have heard her name thrown around by so many people I respect. Where they're like, "Oh, that one year when Lynne came and we did this thing, and then we did this thing in the Amazon," and I was like, "I want to meet Lynne Twist." And so today's the day. It's like Christmas in my house. So I've been so excited to have you here. And I'm really excited to talk about all the amazing things you've done in your life and the work that you're putting out there, the new book, and then some. So first of all, I just want to say welcome to the show, Lynne. I'm so glad to have you here. Do you mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get rolling? All right, let's do it. So audience members who are new to the show, Greatness Machine, we're about two things. We're about people who are living their passions, those who are creating greatness in the world, and those that have done so despite the odds. And Lynne is neither short of passion nor greatness, as we're going to learn soon here. So as I mentioned before, I came to learn of Lynne through my GOT family. And fast forward to about, 9 months ago, I'm listening to Happy Money by Ken Honda, and he's talking about Lynne's book, which is The Soul of Money. And, I've talked a lot about this on the show, like my relationship with money, which I've just recently kind of overcome this really, would say kind of a toxic relationship with money. And so I put her book on my list, but I was like, I'll reach out to her and see if she wants to come on the show and we can talk about the book. And her team was like, oh, she has a new book, Living a Committed Life. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So we're here to talk about that today, the books, and as well as all these other amazing things. I mean, Buckminster Fuller, and oh my God, Est. It's like the list goes on of all these things that have crossed paths in my life that I wanted to introduce the show to. But I want to give your formal bio. So for listeners who are not familiar with Lynne, she's coming to us by way of San Francisco. I, being a fellow former San Franciscan, can love and appreciate that. She's an award-winning speaker, the co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance, founder of the Soul of Money Institute, and author of The Soul of Money, as well as Living a Committed Life, Finding Freedom and Fulfillment in a Purpose Larger Than Yourself. So with that said, Lynne, welcome to the show. I'd like to start by us, we love origin stories here at the Greatness Machine. I think that when people hear people's kind of beginnings and how they got to where they're at, it gives a little bit of context on how it's possible for us people, normal mortals who are trying to create greatness, to know that, hey, the people that are on the show, they're mortals too. They just did the things that needed to happen to really live their calling. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit of your origin story, if you don't mind.
Well, I have several different chapters in my life that have different origin stories, but it's all connected. So I'll start with when I was a young girl. I was just before my 14th birthday. My father died suddenly of a heart attack in the middle of the night with no warning, and he was 50 years old. So it was really a shock for our family. I'm the third in 4 kids, and my mom was completely unprepared. She was 36 and she was 46, but she didn't know where the safe deposit box key was. She didn't know about the insurance. She was so unprepared for her husband to drop dead in the middle of the night. He didn't even struggle. He was, they were sleeping in the same bed in the morning. He looked kind of tired to her, so she let him sleep. And then when she went back a couple hours later, he was cold. He was dead. And it was just like a horrendous shock for her and for all of us. And as a child, I was still kind of a child, but as a young teen, a tween, and girls are often kind of, not always, but in some cases before they really mature, they're kind of in love with their dad. And I was kind of in love with him. He was a musician, and he was famous, and he was charismatic, and I played the piano, and I took tap dancing and ballet and every possible lesson to please him. And when he died, I somehow, without thinking this thought, well, God, it must be my fault. Now, and I think I found out that that's quite typical of children who lose a parent, or there's a divorce or some tragedy. They, you kind of think it's your fault, even though you don't consciously believe that. It's in your, I don't know, in your molecules or something. And so I got very spiritual, I would say now, but then what I knew was religion. Got a little bit religious. And it took me from being a popular high school kid, cheerleader, homecoming queen, kind of dating the football captain kind of person who I was, to having that outer life, which looked really good and everything was like perfect. But then inner life was a very deep inner life to sort of heal from my dad's death. And so I'll say that is really the truthful origin of so much of what I feel I am today. But then later in life, after I got married and started to have children, I went to Stanford. I married my Stanford boyfriend, my beloved Bill Twist. I've been married to him for, decades and decades and decades. And we have kids. And but early in my married life, I took something called the EST training. And I know you know what that is. And the EST training was an early kind of groundbreaking program of the human potential movement. I took it in 1974, so a long time ago. And it was 2 or 3 years old, and it was very controversial and kind of weird. And it was, people were curious about it, but they didn't trust it. It had a little cult feeling to it. But I absolutely loved it. And it kind of bonked me on the head like a 2x4 and woke me up from being down a track of, Bill and I need to join a country club. Bill and I he's starting to make some money. I need to know more about wine. Bill and he's making a little more money now. He looks like he's going to really do well. We better do, instead of going camping on vacation, we should go to Provence, or we should know more about art. I was trying to be hip and cool and someone who's like that. And then I took the S training and bang, I realized I was living an inauthentic life, trying to live up, fit in. And that woke me up to living a life that's authentic, that's about making a difference with my life, about being in touch with my own humanity, my own humility, and full self-expression. So I'll stop there. That's part one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'd like to kind of take a step back because one of the first questions when I was listening to your book, it sounded like you have had mystical experiences even from childhood. And you talk about this moment when you were in a garden and there was a statue that, I don't want to know if I want to give it away, but like you said, the statue started crying and there's this God moment. And how old were you again when your father passed away?
It was the day before my 14th birthday. So I was, 13.
And did you grow up,
days,
it sounded like
14.
you grew up in was it Catholic environment or it was a religious environment? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was we were a Catholic family. We weren't super religious, but we went to mass every week. And I went to public school because I was really that kind of a person. I wanted to be in a big high school. But I went to Sunday school and I had a really beautiful Sunday school teacher who was a nun named Sister Benjamin. And my mother was overwhelmed when my father died because my father was a famous man. He was a band leader and a musician. And so she was overwhelmed with the press and the fans and, what am I going to do about the money? And so the kids were kind of farmed out, all 4 of us, to other families while she sorted out, oh my God, what do I do? And I went into the arms of Sister Benjamin, my nun Sunday school teacher who just saved my life. So,
I just wanted to get some clarity on that. I wasn't sure how old you were because obviously you talk about this like you blame yourself for your father's death, and that there's this moment when you're in a garden and you see, I think it's like a statue of Mary, I think it was. I don't remember if that was who it was, and that the statue started crying, right. and so for like a person that maybe has not had a mystical experience, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that because I'm a person that has friends who are a bit mystical, I can appreciate that. But I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think that for people that have not had that experience, they might read your book or might hear something like that and be like, "Oh, this sounds crazy." But can you talk about that experience at all?
Yeah. Well, when you look back on something, it makes total sense to you. At the time, I was so in such deep grief and shock from my father's death that I went on retreat, a Catholic retreat at a convent near right near where I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, and the convent was called Cabrini Green, and it was in Des Plaines, maybe an hour from my house. And I told my friends I was going to see my grandmother because I missed the big football game and I was missing, all the cool stuff. And I was a cool kid. So why wasn't Lynne here? Well, I said to everybody I was going to see my grandmother, which was a big lie. I went to this retreat center to grieve and lament and cry over my father's death. And I was walking in a garden at this beautiful, very simple convent, actually it was, and retreat center. And there was a statue of the Virgin Mary. And as I said, I sort of went to religion. I didn't really know about spirituality then. So religion was kind of my go-to place. And I remember kneeling in front of the statue and I was crying. And I put my arms out to, the Virgin Mary, I'm so sorry. I've lost my dad. I can't remember what I said, but the statue literally started crying that's my memory and my experience. And then at a certain point, her arms went up.
Yeah, you did.
I can't remember if I put that in the book, but it was just like, this is like impossible, but I'm being blessed. This is a holy, reverent moment. I'm being absolved almost like, and I remember it was so moving. And so it wasn't shocking. It was validating. It was affirming. It was healing. And it wasn't confusing. It was deeply, deeply moving and beautiful. And that was the first mystical experience that I can actually remember so that I can talk about it. After that in my life, it's almost like that opened an aperture, like a doorway, a portal, to know that there's other ways of knowing. And since that time, obviously now, fast forward many, many years, I work with indigenous peoples in the Amazon. I worked with Mother Teresa in India. I've had many amazing experiences that weren't technically religious, but deeply spiritual and you could say mystical. But that was the first one that I can really remember. And it really, really changed my understanding of reality. It just changed everything because suddenly I had there was a much bigger world than the one we can touch and
do you think,
feel and navigate.
The big question I wanted to ask you is, obviously, and we're going to get into, a lot of the things you've done throughout your life, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right way to ask this question. Here, I'm just going to say it the way what question popped in my head when I read that in the book, which was, do you think God chooses people to have those moments specifically so that there's work that can be done at a level that many people that don't have those experiences don't get chosen to have those? Does that make sense? Like that there's this, like, I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
I don't know. That's the real answer. What I would suggest is that God comes through where there's an opening, where there's an aperture. And often a cancer diagnosis, the death of a parent, even a bankruptcy or tragedy, creates an opening where your heart is broken open. And when your heart is broken open, you're available to life in a different way. And that was the case for me. So I'm not saying I was chosen or not chosen. I'm just saying my heart was broken open and there was an opening, an aperture, a clearing for that to come through.
And so you had that moment. And I think you also mentioned that you had another moment where your father actually came to you and told you that he wanted you to start, it was okay to play piano again or to perform again. Was that, do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, because the S training was so powerful for me. Everybody has different things. Some people become Buddhists. Some people, find a guru. Some people it happens through poetry, or they read a book and suddenly everything changes. For me, the S training was just like a huge deal. And I'm not saying that was true for everybody, although many people would say that. And in the S training, I think what happened was there were processes in there where I completed my guilt about my father's death. I didn't even know I had this guilt. I didn't, it wasn't cognitive. It was just like, I realized it in the S training in 1974 when I was 20 something years old. I've been holding myself accountable for my father's death. And that's just not true. He died. He had a heart attack. It's not my fault. And so I completed it because when I unpacked it in the S training, I realized that it was because I hadn't practiced the piano. He was a pianist, and I had stopped practicing the piano, and my piano teacher, I had started cheating on my piano teacher. I mean, there's a whole thing there, a whole story there, but bottom line was I was a naughty girl because I didn't practice my piano. Now I'm 14 years old, but still I wanted to please my dad more than anything in the world. And when I stopped practicing and I didn't have time to practice and I started having boyfriends and my friends were more important than practicing piano, that was healed in the S training. And I realized that's not why he died. He died because he died. And I stopped practicing the piano and that wasn't the reason he died. And I completed it. And so when I completed it, I was free. I became free. I became whole.
What do you, so, number one, thank you for sharing that. But I wanted to kind of fast forward because you end up going to Stanford and that was your father's alma mater. Is that correct? And so you end up at Stanford, you meet your husband.
Right, yeah.
I think you called him, I wrote down there was an acronym, BMOC, Big Man on Campus. And so you end up kind of in this hedonic lifestyle of, keeping up with the Joneses and, San Francisco. And what's interesting is that, like, this time period, like the mid to late 60s, early 70s, there was this like collective consciousness happening in the Bay Area, right? Summer of Love happened in 1969 in Panhandle Park, and the Haight-Ashbury was going off, the Grateful Dead was happening, and we had a lot of anti-war things happening with Vietnam War. So I mean, it's interesting that you went from a place literally like halfway across the United States to the center of the universe as far as this collective consciousness. And so I guess my question for you is, do you think that you were drawn there from, I believe that there's like certain vibrations that kind of draw us to certain places. I went to San Francisco in 2001. It resonated for me. I'm now in Austin. It resonates with me. I feel there's an energy here. Were you drawn to the energy? I mean, to San Francisco? Do you remember having those feelings? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, my mother was from San Francisco. She was born and raised there. So we went to San Francisco to see my grandmother a lot. And I always thought someday I'm going to live in San Francisco. I love San Francisco. I loved the ocean. I loved the city. I loved how cosmopolitan and classy it was. I just thought it was the coolest ever. And then, I prayed like a maniac because that's what I did at that time. That was my spiritual thing, praying. That I would get into Stanford like my dad so that I could go to California and live in the Bay Area at least for 4 years. And then I ended up getting into Stanford. I thought, oh, that's a terrible mistake they're making, but I'm going to pretend like it's not. And then I slipped through the cracks somehow. And then I, made peace with that and married my Stanford sweetheart, Bill Twist. And we knew we were going to live in San Francisco. He took a job in, we came back to Chicago and he went to Northwestern Business School, which was great for us because then he bonded with my family and my sisters and my mom and everything. So that was 2 years in Chicago, which is where I was from. So that was great. But as soon as he started interviewing for jobs, and he was number one in his class at business school, he's a superstar. He really took the interviews, most of them, for any firm that would place us in San Francisco. So we really both wanted to go there. And he is from Newport Beach. So he's a California guy. He's a long line of Californians. He goes several generations back to California. So he really wanted to get back to California. And I always wanted to live in California, and we wanted Northern California. So it was kind of on a practical level, which is I'm speaking about, you're talking about on a deeper level. I think that deeper level was also there for both of us, but we didn't talk like that then. We didn't say those things. And I would say it did pull me there because I was during Stanford, I was one of the people who was against the war. You know, when I was at Stanford, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy, Malcolm X were assassinated. And then after I graduated, I don't know if I had this in the right order, but there were in 5 years, there were 4 assassinations of the heroes of my generation. The 2 Kennedys, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And so it was jarring. And I was an on-campus, you know, against the war, big on the civil rights movement, all of that. So when we went to Chicago, I wanted to get back in that action, and that was happening in San Francisco.
So
that's also,
what drew you to Est? Because obviously you had 3 kids, 1973. Your husband's like moving on up the corporate ladder in, you know, the business world of, you know, high flying San Francisco. You had talked about, you know, this whole going to Provence and, you know, figuring out wine, and all of a sudden Est lands in your lap. What was the introduction there? And for people that don't know what Est is, maybe if you don't mind giving them a little bit of background, I'd appreciate that.
Well, EST was a program invented and created by Werner Erhard, and out of many, many disciplines that he participated in to create a transformational experience that was of transforming our consciousness from living in an inauthentic way, trying to fit in, trying to be somebody we're not, to discovering who you really are, the profound humility of understanding who you are, and the fact that you could make a difference with your life, I would say. You know, there's a lot of ways to talk about it, but that's one way. And then it became what's now called Landmark. The Landmark Education Corporation runs something called the Forum, which is the thing that came after the S training. We were also kind of asleep then. The S training was was a big wake up. You know, it was kind of harsh. And then the Landmark is not as harsh. Landmark Forum, because there's much more consciousness now in the world. But anyway, that's what it is. And I mean, it's funny how I ended up there. I saw my friend Sandra, who I just talked to yesterday, at a party in Sausalito, across the bay from San Francisco, and she looked so different to me. I saw her across the room at a party, and she'd lost some weight, so that you know, that was kind of obvious, but she was kind of glowing. I mean, really, she was like luminous, and she's a really cool person. I admire her. So I remember making my way through the people over to Sandra. I said, Sandra, you look so great. You've lost weight, but there's something else. You just look so radiant. And she said, well, I just took this thing. I can't explain it, but it was 2 weekends in a hotel room with one leader and 250 people. It's called the S training, and I'm just floating on air. It's like, I don't know. I just feel fantastic about life, and I can feel that it's not temporary. It's like something magical, miraculous happened there. I can't tell. I can't explain it, but I can feel it. And I said, well, you look it. Where do I sign? You know, I couldn't wait to do whatever it was. I didn't want to even know another thing about it. I just wanted to do it. And so you know, she said, well, here's where you go. We didn't have internet and all the stuff we have now. So here's where you go. Next Tuesday night, there's this thing. It's a guest seminar. You can just go. It's free. It's at this hotel. Just go and find out for yourself. But I highly recommend it. So I went and I signed up right away. I mean, no one needed to convince me. And then I took it. And Bill went too. Bill went to this guest event to sign up or to find out about it. And he was reluctant. Everybody had name tags on. They were too happy. They were kind of like too happy. They were everybody was like happy and smiley. And it was kind of like, he was a little like, this is too much. But I thought, oh my God, I want to be like these people. So I said, I'll take it first. And then if it works for me and I like it, you take it. And I came back from it and I was like transformed. I remember standing at the sink. I can't remember what's in the book and what's not, but I was standing in the sink in our flat. I was washing the dishes after I took the S training. It was like a Monday night after dinner. And I was looking at the bubbles in the sink. and the sun was setting through the window, and it was shining on the bubbles in the sink. I was hand washing the dishes, and they were so beautiful. The water felt so good on my skin. The setting sun was so exquisite. There was this experience of absolute perfection of the universe, the beauty of what is so right now in this moment. And I started to cry. I was so moved. And that was like the day after I got out of the S training. And I've had that experience, ever since, in a way. I mean, I don't want to be too exaggerated about it, but there's something, I went through some sort of a process where I'm capable and open to being present to the absolute profound magnificence of life. And not every minute of every day, but I know that in my heart and soul.
Do you think
and
that
came from the S training?
I mean, I kind of had a moment like that recently. And for me, it was having this realization that I actually realized that I was a person that was not a very grateful person. And then I discovered gratitude, like truly. And for me, that has allowed for those moments. Do you think gratitude was part of that for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would use the word transformation then. My life was transformed into a gift, a blessing, a treasure, not like me, like I'm special, but life itself. And since then, I would say gratitude and gratefulness. I've worked with Brother David Steindl-Ros, the great Benedictine monk that is the living embodiment of gratefulness. So yes, and I totally agree with that. I mean, gratitude instantly, no matter what's happening, if you're grateful, you can transform anything into a moment of revelation and illumination, I think.
So you worked your way into the organization, started connecting with the founder, I believe, is Werner Erhard. Is that correct? And worked your way up, and then all of a sudden, this movement around the Hunger Project was born. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that? Because I feel like that's a really big part of what the foundation of really the book and what comes out of that.
Yes. Well, Werner Erhard is a remarkable, he's like a genius that is really tuned into what we're talking about, let's say. It's sort of ineffable. And I got engaged with the organization called EST, and then I was tasked with a job to identify what was called sphere of influence people, or you could say a more common term is VIPs, that were going into the S trainings, to go over the lists of people and see if there's special people that Werner should meet and have a special relationship with, because they were senators or congresspeople or movie stars or people of note, so that he could continue to build the legitimacy and reputation of the organization, which was a little sketchy at the time, for what he called the EST Advisory Board. So I was involved with that kind of work, identifying who were kind of people that Werner should have a special relationship with, or at least just know they're going through the program. And in the course of that, I noticed that Buckminster Fuller's grandson was taking the EST training, a guy named Jamie Snyder. And I had always been curious and admiring of Buckminster Fuller, who was the great, called at that time the grandfather of the future, a really remarkable inventor, engineer, architect, a man who many people revered as the grandfather of the future, a man way ahead of his time. And so when I found out that his grandson was taking the S training, that was an opening to have Werner Erhard meet with Buckminster Fuller. And so my friend Ron Lansman and I, we cooked up a plan to have Werner Erhard and Buckminster Fuller meet, because we thought these two men, if they met, a miracle would occur. And it did. They met, and out of that relationship, something called the Hunger Project was born. Buckminster Fuller was dedicated to see if one ordinary little individual, referring to himself, could live a life that would make a difference to all of human family and future generations, a positive difference. That was his ethic. That was his experiment. That was his life's devotion. Werner Erhard was devoted to the transformation of the human condition, and he was studying hunger as one of the ways that he could tackle and have all these people who were so turned on after they took the S training be up to something beyond their own transformation, be up to something that would benefit the world. So he was studying hunger, and he had a whole bunch of files called The Hunger Project, because he didn't have a name for the thing. And when Buckminster Fuller and Werner Erhard met, they looked at what's the most fundamental breakdown in the human condition that we could apply transformative values to in a way that it would get resolved. And they talked about hunger, and they chose that. And then Werner, out of those meetings, who is a very, very bold human being. He, shortly after that, made a commitment in the presence of some other very important people. I commit, he said, to bring the commitment to end hunger into the world, to end it, not just alleviate suffering, not just do the best we can with hungry people, but to end world hunger. We have enough food to feed everybody. But yet we have a billion people, a quarter of humanity, hungry all the time. This was in 1976. So I commit to end that. And what's missing is a commitment to end it. And that was sort of strange to people. Well, that doesn't feed anybody, making a commitment to end it. But we soon all saw, and Buckminster Fuller was a huge part of this, and this is really the subject of my book, when you make a bold, big, inspiring, kind of almost unconfrontable but glorious commitment, it comes back and transforms you into the person you need to be to fulfill it. That's actually how it works. It's like if it's a commitment larger than your own life that you're not interested in taking credit for, but you want to participate in making it happen, that commitment, we all know the quote from W.H. Murray, until one commits, there's hesitation, a chance to draw back. But once you do commit, providence moves too. All unforeseen forces start to join you in helping you fulfill that commitment. And that's the dynamic of commitment. That's what I wrote about. And I learned that early on, and Werner knew that in his heart and soul, that there was no commitment to end world hunger. There was just these attempts to make it not so bad. But how in a world that we had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times as much food as we needed for everybody alive at that time, would we allow 1 billion people to go hungry all the time, and many of them starve to death? Children under 5, many of them children under 5. It's an integrity issue of the human family. It's not just logistics, it's integrity, that we would allow that in the space called our lives. So that, when Werner made that commitment, and I was present when he made it publicly, I just knew this is why I was born. This is what my life's about. I am that commitment. I will become one of the people participating or making this happen. I couldn't not. It was a calling. It just swept me off my feet. When I heard him say that, I was in tears. Every part of my body was like vibrating. It was my calling. And so the Hunger Project, we never renamed it. We couldn't. By then it was already called the Hunger Project, became my life's work, not just my job, but my life and my family's life, my husband's life, my children's life. And we became, dedicated to ending hunger.
Pause here, and I want to ask a question about something you said a moment ago, because I think a lot of people that are going to listen to this show or listen to the Greatness Machine in general, and even for myself, I think people want big purpose, right? They want to like what you just said. I'm like, oh my gosh, so lucky to have that calling, so lucky to have that moment. How do you think people that maybe are like, man, I don't know, I haven't figured out my purpose yet. I haven't figured out, I don't have that. I haven't had that Bucky, moment with Buckminster Fuller and Werner Erhard to making this declaration and do something so audacious that struck me in the heart and made me want to go and act. What are your thoughts around folks trying to like distill that or figure that out for themselves?
Well, one of the things that I assert, I believe, everyone doesn't need to believe this, and I don't want to try to give evidence or anything, but one of the things that I assert and suggest and highly recommend is that we're on this planet now, not by accident. That you and I are having this conversation in 2023, which is 23 years into the third millennium, if you put it that way. So this is the third millennium, and we're only 23 years in. This is the first century of the next 1,000 years. And the whole world is in huge, huge flux, transformation, transition, dislocation. Things are falling apart all around us. The political system, the healthcare system, the education system, the economic system. I mean, all of our systems and structures are disintegrating before our eyes, and we can't fix them anymore. We've been propping them up and fixing them and adjusting them for way too long. And now the climate crisis is the big one because it's making it uncertain that we can even survive. So everything's at stake. And I say that's such a gift to be alive at this amazing time, because then there's so much work to do, and wonderful, amazing, courageous, bold, audacious work to do. Now, if that doesn't turn you on, maybe you want to be the best bus driver in Chicago, that when people get on your bus, let me just preface this by saying it's not that everybody has to have a big role or a small role. I just say, feel what's your role and then play your heart out, because that's what the world needs. People who are playing their heart out right now. So my example of a bus driver or kindergarten teacher, that's different than ending world hunger, like my big giant commitment. But at the same time, it's not. So if I'm a bus driver, let's say, that my bus is such a place of joy and calm and acceptance and affirmation, that when people get on my bus in the morning, I welcome them with so much warmth that they make sure they get there at the bus stop at 8:06, so they get on my bus, because I know how to create a field of acceptance and belonging and community and joy and, upliftment for people as they ride from wherever their bus stop is to their destination. And I'm going to do that. And that counts. Mother Teresa said this amazing thing. I mean, she said, she didn't talk a lot, but when she did, she said good stuff. And once she said, and this is now a famous quote, she said, the unadulterated love of one person can nullify the hatred of millions. I mean, just think about that. I can't prove that, but I'll say it again and just think about it. It's a powerful way to live. The unadulterated love of one person can nullify the hatred of millions. That's a way of looking at life. I can't prove it. There's, no evidence. It's not like that. It's a way of looking at life that gives your life meaning and gives you a sense of your own power and capacity to matter. So I'll use a kindergarten teacher. Let's say you're going to just teach kindergarten for 5 years and then you're going to do something else, but you have this kind of calling to teach. Well, when those children are in your care, perhaps your stand or your commitment is they will never forget their kindergarten teacher, because I'm going to be so devoted to having them discover who they really are as I teach them to read and write and add and subtract. Yes, I'll do all that. But the experience they're going to have with me every day for that year of their life is that they are valued, they matter, they're unique, they're amazing, they're extraordinary, and they can do whatever they want with their life. And that's a big, bold commitment. So it doesn't need to be you end world hunger or save the Amazon or stop child abuse. But if you're on the playing field now, and we are because we were born, we're living at an epic, epic time in history. And everything's at stake. And it's such a thrill that it is, because it ennobles our life. You know, the choices we make, the choices you and I make this year, 2023, really impact the future of life for 1,000 years. Like, no kidding. I know that to be true. And that sounds like some people like a burden. No, it's too much responsibility. No, that ennobles your life. That means you can live the most meaningful life any generation of humankind has ever lived. How awesome is that? How awesome is that? So I'm one of the people, at least I like to speak from this place to counter discouragement, resignation, despair. You know, we're screwed. It can't turn out. It's awful. Two, I don't step over the school shootings. I don't step over the climate crisis as if it isn't here. I work on it. I don't step over hunger and poverty. I've been there. I've been in war zones. I've held dying babies in my arms. I'm not stepping over that. But I'm about a vision that will pull us through this pain. Pain pushes until vision pulls. And we're pregnant with something glorious, I think. So,
No,
I don't know.
no,
I can't remember
it
your
was a
question
good.
now. I always forget the question.
No,
I
you
get
answered the
started.
question. I mean, my question was essentially, how does one find their calling? And I said that it felt like a lucky moment for you to be there. And obviously, like if you're a believer in destiny, or that God meant for you to be there to have that moment to then go do the work, which, you know, whether you're spiritual or you don't believe in God or whatever, I'm a believer that like we're not in control. I mean, we're in control of how we show up every day, but we're not in control of what we're called to do. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so yes, you answered the question. In fact, the point I took away from that you said was to show up in deep love and to give love. And
Yeah.
I think that's something
Right.
that no matter what your spiritual beliefs are, no one can argue that's not the best way that we all want to have people to show up for us. You know, you talk about in the book, you know, and you open with this in the book, but this idea of the source, and there was a lot of talk around your belief in the source, and that talk about that a little bit, because I think that when we get outside of our ego, because what I'm finding now, and I've gone through a fairly big transformation over the last few years, where I was very ego driven, very on the hedonic treadmill, you know, grinding to put more money in the bank and to measure my balance sheet against somebody else's and have the vanity metrics around how big of a company I built, and to now shifting away from that. Not that I don't still like to do some of that stuff, but shifting away from that and being more along the lines of showing up, and what I say is it's not about me. You know, I'm here to do the work of a higher calling and of a higher being, and I'm not here to even try to figure it out. Like, it's going to show me for me. And so my listeners have probably not heard this side of me too much, because I dabble in it, but I have you on the show, so I'm talking to you about things that are happening to me. And so the term "the source," what does that mean, and how does that play into these ideas of deep purpose and deep calling and creation, as far as like when you reference it in the book?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, because it's a little bit difficult to talk about, and I don't want to reify it or concretize it too much. For me, source, some people might call it God. Some people might call it the natural world or the earth, the calling of the earth right now. I founded the Pachamama Alliance with my husband, Bill, and John Perkins. And Pachamama means Mother Earth. It actually means, to the Quechua people, the earth, the sky, the universe at all time. And when I'm in the rainforest with the indigenous people, I feel the source of life, the spirit of life, when I'm open coming through me. Because the indigenous people, they don't live in the forest. They live of the forest. They are an expression of the forest. And source to me is the expression of the spirit of life. For religious people, you might call it the Holy Spirit. For Muslim people, it might be called the through line of mercy. There's different terms from different religious disciplines, and for atheists, it may be, or people who are really secular, it may be, the experience of maybe the evolutionary force that put the stars in motion and generated the universe and created the possibility of life itself. But I think we all know at some level of our being that there's moments where it's very present that we're tapped into something way beyond our own personality, identity, or agenda. And it may be just when you see a newborn baby, or it may be when you get up early enough to see the sunrise. It may be something as simple as standing at the base of a waterfall and feeling the mist and seeing how glorious it is. Or that moment, when I was washing the dishes and the bubbles were so beautiful. Was that a delusion, or was that me being in touch with source? I think it was me being in touch with source. And source is a taproot for, and it's miraculous, and it's beautiful, and it's always here. And we sometimes, it gets obfuscated or blocked by our personality, our personal agenda, our some people would call it our ego. Our ego, I mean, we all have one, and we can put it in service to something. But when it touches your soul, when you're close to tears because something's so beautiful or so magnificent or so moving to you, that's source moving through. When we say we're moved, I say source is moving through. I think that's really what that term means. So, and everybody knows that. We don't talk about it that much because it's hard to talk about, but everybody has those experiences. I'm sure of it. And they discount them sometimes, like, ooh, that's too woo-woo, or that was weird, or wow, I'll never forget that, or oh my God, I'm in touch with something greater than myself. So we interpret it all kinds of ways, but it's here. It's and the more open you are to it, in my view, the more fulfilled your commitment to whatever you're up to can be for you. And I'm not in touch with it all the time, but I know it's here. And I'm going to even say it's like right. A little bit too much to even say that. But for some people, it's clearly their experience of the Holy Spirit or God, but in the natural world, for example, when I really am troubled and confused and hurt and despondent, I know if I go outside and sit at the base of one of these glorious redwood trees that are near my house, something happens to me and I'm okay again. What is that? I don't know. But
thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, because I knew what you meant by it. But I think for folks that are reading the book, they may not. They maybe haven't had that experience. And I love what you said, and I think it's important for listeners to kind of hear that again, which is the more you do it, the more you can connect with it, right? The more that opportunity exists, and not to discount it, right? Because I have a really tough time. I think I had a friend I was talking to about this, and we had a conversation about, it was on Netflix or something on Discovery Channel. It's like how many galaxies there are and how many planets there are. And when you start doing the math, it was like 21 sextillion, planets. It's right. So you start thinking about things in terms of that. By the way, that's a 21 with 17 zeros after it. That's a lot of billions. Planets, not even just, it's unbelievable when you start thinking like that, like the enormity of the world we're in, right? And to just think about just you, it just feels like it's this, there's got to be more, at least the way I see it. Mathematically, how did that happen? I can't tell you, but I could tell you if I start to think mystically about it, I'm like, yeah, I can't explain it, but I can explain something mystical probably created it. That makes it a lot easier. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. So I want to pull back in, because I know I want to get you out of here on time. We got about 12 minutes. So you obviously took that moment and the hunger, excuse me, I want to make sure I get the name of the Hunger Project. Is that correct? Yeah, and with that, this became
Yes.
a worldwide
Right.
sensation. 6 million, people were involved with this. It went global. Was it the United Nations that got involved with it as well? Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's such a great example of something like, to Buckminster Fuller's comment, how can one little man turn something so large and enormous? This is literally a perfect, analogy for that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, let's see. Well, we created a movement, really. And a movement is different than a campaign. You drive a campaign. Our political campaigns are driven by money and by lobbying and by people who are trying to win and defeat somebody else. A movement is something that flows through you, and it is so captivating that other people join. It's like being swept into a stream or something that is moving. And we created with so much heart and core integrity, I would say, at the very heart of the Hunger Project, that it became a movement. And that's how we were able to inspire millions of people to get involved in committing themselves to playing some role in ending world hunger. And the role they played was to commit to it. Then some of them took action, and many of them started organizations. Thousands of organizations came out of the Hunger Project, thousands of them. And, hundreds of millions and billions of actions. And then some people just signed a little card that said, I am committed to making the end of hunger an idea whose time has come. And this phrase, an idea whose time has come, comes from Victor Hugo. And the full phrase is, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. When an idea's time comes, you can't stop it. And so our goal was to cause an idea's time to come, the end of world hunger. And that's a very, kind of esoteric, philosophical, ontological thing. But we did that. Every organization on this planet before the Hunger Project was alleviating the suffering, was helping little Maria in Guatemala with $15 a month, was giving aid, was rearranging food lines, was sending irrigation techniques. All of that stuff is still happening and very, very important. But now it's in a context. That is content. Inside of a context, we're ending world hunger. And the people living in the conditions of hunger, rather than being hopeless, helpless victims that we have to rescue because those poor souls are hungry and we have to feel sorry for them and, take some of what we have and give it to them. That paradigm, which was the way it was before the Hunger Project was born, with, middle of the night photographs with kids with flies in their eyes and bloated bellies and, skinny as a rail, and making people feel guilty because they were about to have another sandwich or pizza in the middle of the night. And they see this on the screen so that they give money. That way of perceiving hunger is no longer the case. You'll see in every brochure of every hunger organization a picture of a young woman whose I matter, a billboard or something. So we shifted the conversation from a billion starving people that are suffering there, we have to feel sorry for them and help them, to there's a billion people, not hungry people living in the conditions of hunger and poverty, whole and complete people just like you and me, living in the conditions of hunger and poverty, standing on the front lines of ending world hunger by transforming those conditions. And you and I, who are not living in those conditions, we have the privilege to join them so that we're all on the playing field together. We're co-equal partners. It's not like we've got everything and we had to give it to them. No, they know things that we go to workshops to get the kind of inner strength that they have to live through the day. They have more courage to live through the day than you and I are going to need in our lifetime to feed their kids when there's nothing there and there's no water. So, and we read 10 books and go to workshops to get that kind of inner strength. So it's the haves and the haves, not HALVES. But halves, HAVES and HAVES, we need each other. And those of us in the affluent world, we need to be humbled. We need to have work that makes a difference. We need to find our inner strength. We have so much material la-la land out here that we forget that who we really are self-reliant, self-sufficient human beings, and that we, like the people who are self-reliant, self-sufficient human beings living in those horrible conditions, are together here on one planet to make all of it work better. So it's a really beautiful thing, the Hunger Project. And this thing about causing an idea's time to come, it was almost like an experiment, but now it's happened. Every single organization working on hunger and even poverty in the world now speaks about ending it. And that's a very different way to work on something. And of course there's setbacks, and of course it's challenging. Of course the pandemic, set back a lot of things. Of course the AIDS crisis made it some of it ever more difficult. But when I started working on hunger, I'll just tell you this one statistic. There were 4.3 billion people on Earth in 1977. 4.3 billion. 4.3 billion. Of those 4.3 billion, a billion people, 1/4 of humanity was hungry all the time, and many of them starving to death. 44,000 deaths a day. 44,000 of children under 5. Today, we've just hit 8 billion people on this planet. No, I'm sorry.
I think it is 7. It was like 7.8 last time I looked. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we've just hit 8 billion. And we have 12,000 people dying every day. From 44,000 to 12,000 children under 5. Wow. That's a huge drop. And almost twice as many people. So this is a miracle, and it is ending. There's setbacks and it's difficult, but it is. So that wasn't possible when we started, but it's become an idea whose time has come. And that comes from human commitment. That's why I wrote this book. We need now to commit to end the climate crisis, to restore the climate. We can do it. We can do it. It's not impossible. We created the climate crisis. We can reverse it. We can. We must stand for that. Not must. I don't need to put it that way. I stand for that. I stand for that. And that's powerful. That creates a context for all the content, all the solar panels and all the recycling and all the new metals that are being invented and all the coal-fired plants being closed, to be in a context, we are getting it done rather than we're trying as hard as we can and maybe we can do it. That's a different space. So the Hunger Project established the power of commitment, enormous power of commitment. And, if you've ever run a marathon, you commit to running 26 miles, you get yourself ready to do it. And then when you're in the marathon, you're going to goddamn get to the finish line. No kidding. And then you become someone who can do it rather than, you give up. You just don't. You're committed. So, there's a million examples, but commitment is so much more powerful than we know. And we're so much more powerful than we know. So that's really what I'm trying to say in that book.
My gosh, what a treat having you here. I'm going to ask you our greatness question. But before I'm going to tell you, when I was reading your book, I realized that you had mentioned that you love the poetry of Rumi. And I have 2 sons, and my oldest son's named Rumi. So we named him after the poet Rumi. And I named my younger son Pablo after Pablo Neruda. So we I wrote my purpose for Stegen. I said that my purpose is to live a poetic life. So I thought you might appreciate that. Yeah, I saw that. I'm like, I got to tell her that my oldest is named Rumi. I love him, man. He's amazing. All right. I'm going to ask you the greatness question. I know I want to get you out of here on time, and then we can let everyone know where to find the book, which is in places where all great books are sold. But so our greatness question, we ask all of our guests this, which is, what is the number one barrier to creating greatness that you've overcome in your life, and how did you overcome it?
I'd say the greatest barrier that people have they're afraid to commit. They think it's going to entrap them. And what actually happens is it frees you. And if you're afraid to commit, you keep your options open. And do I go this way? Do I that way? I want to make sure my options are open. You can't move. It's lateral. When you commit, all your energy goes forward and you're pulled into a place where you can fully express your gifts. So fear of commitment, and the answer is commitment. And I'd say commitment is how to find it is what breaks your heart and what makes your heart sing. You put those two things together and you can discover what you're committed to.
I love that so much. Thank you so much. So the book is Living a Committed Life by Lynne Twist. Lynne, what a pleasure having you here. So much gratitude from myself and my GOT family for introducing me to your work and the world for introducing your work. The world conspires to bring things together. And I didn't mention this, but I was, this was after we had already booked you on the show, but I just finished The Path Made Clear by Oprah. And she talks about her work with you. So I'm like, oh my gosh, like Oprah's talking about Lynne and Ken Honda's talking about Lynne. I can't wait to meet you. I finally get to connect with you. And I'm so grateful to get you here to share your work with our audience. Thank you so much. So much gratitude for me.
Thank you, Darius. And thank you for the work you're doing and the commitment that you live. And please give my love, really my love and my gratitude to the members of GOT when you go to that meeting. I miss them. I love them. And I treasure that community, and even the ones I hadn't met before, like you. I trust that community. I treasure that community. And
thank you. I will do that. I do want to make sure that we let people know where they can connect with you for your work, the book, The Soul of Money, the book, Living a Committed Life, as well as anything around Pachamama Alliance or the Soul of Money Institute. Is there anything, what's the best way for people to learn more about you and your work?
Well, we didn't talk much about the work in the rainforest, but it's called Pachamama.org is where to go to find out. Pachamama, Pachamama, all one word, Pachamama.org. And there's courses that are free, and there's trips to the Amazon that are not free, but important. And beautiful videos, and it's just a treasure, that work. And then soulofmoney.org is my website for the Soul of Money work, the book, Living a Committed Life. And then you can go on the Soul of Money website and or you can go to Living a Committed Life, and you'll see, you can, sign up for our Wednesday Wisdoms. You can, of course, order the book on any one of your online ways, or go to local bookstores and order it there or buy it there. I love bookstores. I want us to keep them going. And then we do programs. We at the Soul Money Institute do a lot of really extraordinary programs for women. So I just want to put a plug in for that. We do something called the Remarkable Women's Journey. We do something called the Sophia Circle, because I think this is the Sophia century. And we do fundraising trainings online that are really effective for people working in the social profit sector. So there's all kinds of wonderful resources from Pachamama.org and soulofmoney.org. And then Living a Committed Life, the book is, I want it to be everywhere, and it kind of is. You can just type it in and it'll come up on many sites. And also, if your local bookstore doesn't have it, tell them to order it.
We'll do that. So I'll make sure my team puts all this in the show notes. You guys, there's so much greatness here. Check out all of Lynne's work. I mean, it's like we probably could do 5 hours on this show right now just to talk about all of it. But this is such a treat having you here. We'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. With that said, listeners, leaders were givers. Make sure you share this with people that need to hear it. There's so much greatness that Lynne is building into the world and through her different projects. So we want to make sure we're sharing that with other leaders. And with that said, until next time, thank you so much, Lynne. Appreciate you. Peace out. You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.